Hey there, and welcome to the Catching Up with Casey show, where we talk about anything and everything that has to do with building cohesive, vision-driven teams. I am Casey Watts, school impact strategist and the host of this show. Now, if you are here, then you inevitably are an instructional leader who wants to make change happen, even when change seems impossible. And you can do that if you have cohesive, vision-driven teams that have done clarity work. They know exactly where they're headed and how they're going to get there. These teams have done identity work, and they've built their self and social awareness skills. And they have done collaboration work, and they know how to move beyond faux collaboration to get to true collaboration where change happens and where people get on board. I'm so excited to bring to you conversations that help you to do exactly that. The work that needs to be done to build cohesive, vision-driven teams. Now, with all of that said, let's dive into today's conversation. Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to episode 67 of the Catching Up with Casey show. Tonight, our episode is titled How to Nurture Teacher Agency and Collaboration to Combat Fidelity Freeze. And I am joined with none other than Courtney Morgan. Courtney, thank you for coming. I'm so excited to have you. Hold on, let me.
Thanks so much, Casey. I'm really excited to be here. I know there's a little bit of a lag.
Oh, it's okay. It is all good. And you know what? Our audience is awesome. And so they're just going to handle it like pros and just wait in anticipation to hear what you have to say.
Yes.
That's
with bated breath.
Yeah, that's what's going to happen. So let's get started tonight. And Courtney, tell us all about who you are and what your aspirations are, what you do on a day-to-day basis.
So hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. I am a former elementary school teacher turned ESL teacher, turned teacher education professor, and now entering into consulting. So it's been a wild ride and an exciting journey. I am currently working to support teacher candidates who are headed towards elementary education. And it's an interesting time to be in that line of work. But I'm also really, really loving supporting teachers specifically in the area of how to scaffold instruction to make it equitable for English learners and multilingual learners. That's been my passion since my early years of teaching. And it's really fulfilling to get to give other teachers what I didn't have when I was in the classroom, and what made me just about come to tears on the regular, feeling like I didn't know how to support the students in my class well. So that's kind of a little bit about my journey and what I'm doing these days. It's exciting.
Yeah, that is exciting. And man, I feel like there's just almost way too much that we could unpack in this episode, because as you were talking, I was thinking about this webinar that I did with our state, and they're talking about high quality instructional materials. And, you know, like, I understand wanting to provide teachers everything they need tangibly, the tangible materials, but that doesn't take away from the overwhelm that they feel with the varied needs that they have for their students in the classroom. So while I appreciate the idea of giving them the materials they need and everything in their hands, are we really thinking about how they're going to approach that instruction and meet the needs of students? So I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about some of this. Can we start by talking about Fidelity Freeze? Because when you sent me this topic idea, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't wait, because I want to hear what you have to say about Fidelity Freeze within the educational setting and really its impact on teams. So just open it up. Tell us all you have to say about it.
Yeah, it's funny when that phrase came to mind, I was like, "Oh, that's a perfect way of saying it." At the time, I I was supporting a teacher candidate who's doing her internship in a first grade classroom, and the teacher that she was working with had told her, "We are working with this new curriculum, and we've been told we have to teach it to Fidelity. We're not allowed to do anything but stick to the script." And this teacher candidate that I was working with felt really stuck. She was having a hard time figuring out where she could fit in her practice lessons and how she was going to, even for her lessons, uh, infuse them with differentiation and support for different learners. And it just kind of occurred to me because, I had this, as well as multiple other conversations I had with teachers saying this same thing. We're not allowed. There was this sense of they needed permission to go outside of this scripted lesson. And I had experienced that myself as well, upon a new curriculum being adopted. And so it just occurred to me, like, this is not working for our very diverse students we have in the classroom. If teachers are feeling like they have their hands tied, and I also was kind of putting two and two together as we're seeing so much emphasis right now on recognizing teacher expertise, valuing and treating teachers as the professionals that they are, helping teachers feel seen and heard when it comes to their instructional prowess. And that is really diminishing and demoralizing teachers right now, and in
Mm.
contributing to teachers leaving the classroom. And I kind of realized that perhaps a big component of teachers feeling disempowered and like they're losing that sense of agency, could it be that they're losing their instructional creativity, their instructional license to do what they know how to do and love doing, right? So
Mhm.
all this kind of came up, and I just wanted to start advocating for this. And there's the whole multilingual learner differentiation side of what I do that definitely plugs right into this as well. So that's kind of where that was coming from.
Yeah. So I've got someone in the comments. Oh, hey, Karen. She said, yes, I've gotten a letter in my file for not being on the right page. So demoralizing. This is a great conversation. And it
Oh,
is like people experience that. And I'm kind of curious to know from your perspective where that comes from. So let's just like take a step back and think about it from leadership perspective. They're implementing this new curriculum and they use the terms, we're going to use this with Fidelity. And when these teachers get things like Karen just said, like a file, hey, you're not on the right page, why is it coming from leadership that way? Like, why are they thinking Fidelity means we have to do it exactly as scripted and exactly in the order that it says on the right days?
yeah. There's a lot of pros to teaching to Fidelity, to teaching a program to Fidelity. I haven't been on the back end, behind the scenes of a curriculum adoption. So I can't speak from being in those shoes, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not going to claim, or make any assumptions because I haven't been there. I've been on the teacher end of it, right? I've been on the collaborative teams end of it, receiving this curriculum. I can imagine that a school has obviously spent a lot of money to purchase something that a lot of smart people took a lot of time and expertise to create, to build. And I'm going to, as I always try to do, assume positive intentions behind that, right? And I will say, even our local school district here has recently adopted a really strong curriculum for ELA, that is very research based, in terms of science of reading. That is a great program. And it's getting a lot of thumbs up from teachers. And I've also seen a lot of teachers, in online forums saying, actually, I really like our scripted curriculum. It takes a lot of the brain work out of it for me. It simplifies it for me. It helps me know that I'm covering all the bases, especially with reading. I mean,
Mhm.
right? Lots of components to weave together. It's complex. And so it saves teachers a ton of time. There's all these benefits. And I think when a school district has just spent buku money to implement and purchase a new program, obviously you want to know if it's effective. There has to be some way of measuring, was it worth the investment? And the best way to do that is to make sure that your educators are following the program, right?
Mhm.
Are abiding by the recommended strategies and pacing and etc. And so you reach this kind of sticky point then, because on the one hand, I can see why you would want every educator who is utilizing this tool to use it appropriately, to adhere to recommended guidelines, especially if they are newer teachers, if they haven't been trained in something like science of reading, right? There's a lot of massive benefits to having that.
Right.
But the tricky part comes when the discussion stops there, when the space for teachers to expand beyond that, to learn how to maneuver instructionally and use that as a tool, when that goes away, that's where we start to have some problems, because then you have some loss of equity for
Mm.
students who don't need a prescripted one-size-fits-all program. When the discussion doesn't continue and include that whole side of things, the whole differentiation side of things, then that's where I think the impact is going to be the opposite of what we're desiring it to actually be.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. It's such a fine line between handing a curriculum and setting expectations and saying we're going to teach it to Fidelity, and people not understanding what we mean when we say that. So I did an episode. I was with Michelle Rui. She's from Coach from the Couch, and she's a literacy coach. And we were talking about the use of terms in schools and how so many terms are used that people don't have common definitions around. And Fidelity is one of those. Like, what I think when I hear Fidelity could mean something very different from what someone else hears when they or thinks when they hear the word Fidelity. So I want to ask you, let's talk about just some common barriers to nurturing teacher agency that come with Fidelity Freeze.
Barriers to nurturing teacher agency. Well, I think one of the hard things that school districts right now in particular are grappling with, and I've had so many discussions at the college level about this, because we have, new teachers entering the field who need mentors. I think a lot of our experienced teachers may not be around as much as they were previously to coach, to mentor, to rub elbows with teachers that are still learning how to take a curriculum and make it beautiful in the classroom, make it effective. So that's, I think, one of the big challenges is lack of resources to build teacher efficacy.
Yeah.
You got to have personnel. You can't just single-handedly, as an administrator doing a bajillion other things, or an instructional coach who's serving an entire school building, have the time to go and mentor and coach teachers in how to see a student need and say, all right, I'm making a note of that. I'm assessing that. How am I going to address that? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes this whole other level of intentionality that goes far beyond just reading the script off the teacher guide. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the difficult things. Also, just teachers being overwhelmed. I'm not going to lie. There's lots of teachers out there that are like, hey, I'm cool with reading the script. Like, I don't have to think about it. I just want to walk into my classroom, do the thing, and we're done.
Mm-hmm.
Can that just be all, please?
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. There was days when I felt like that as a teacher.
Yeah.
You have your low energy days where you're like, yeah.
Yeah. Not
So
today.
that's hard. But yeah, just lack of collaborative time together, I think, is probably the biggest one.
Yeah.
Teachers are going to grow the most when they can spend time together.
Mhm.
And in so many school buildings with so many teachers that I talk to, they say, look, I have such limited time, limited planning time, limited time with my teams. And I know you talk about this topic so much on your
Yeah.
podcast as well.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, I'm going to kind of put a plug right here because I think this is perfect timing. In a few weeks, it's actually quite a bit of time before this episode happens, but I am doing an episode specifically about rolling out curriculum or new programs because it becomes this chaotic thing. And actually, I'm going to change this because it's actually not curriculum chaos; it's curriculum cakewalk, I think. Ooh, I need to double check, but I'm going to put that link up, guys. So just be on the lookout. I'm going to put that link up here in just a second. But that live session, I'm going to have people register for it so I know who's coming and I can ensure that I get people the resources they need afterwards. But it is really all about how to support effective implementation because that's one of the hardest things. And ineffective implementation ends up with us experiencing fidelity freeze like you've talked about. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. I
Yeah.
think there's so much you can do on the front end to prevent some of these issues. And the way that you communicate that definition of fidelity, the way that you communicate expectations. And I even was thinking earlier, like, let's not just leave it with communicating expectations. Let's actually model those expectations. Like, what if we, in the middle of training for a new curriculum, had someone, whether it's, a representative from the company, or just 3 months in, you start having teacher leaders come up and you spotlight their best practices, say, hey, like, could you just kind of walk through a lesson with us and share with us, what did you do for your students who have learning differences? How did you support your newcomers that don't even read or write in English yet, and tell us about what that looked like, what occurred in the margins of your lesson that was the good stuff that only you can do. Like, share that with us. I feel like the more you can do that on the front end and give teachers this kind of, I don't know, it helps teachers breathe easier when they know exactly what's expected of them.
Mhm.
And that includes room for them to have their agency and expertise
Yeah.
activated, right?
Yes, absolutely. So great.
I love that you're doing that training. That's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. It's one of my favorite things to talk about because it can be so overwhelming for so many people. Interestingly enough, next week I'm doing an episode with Jolene, and she's going to be talking about the role of accountability and expectations and how it actually empowers teachers. So you are spot on. People need to know what is expected of them. And if you're going to tell teams to implement something with fidelity, number one, like you said, Courtney, they need to have time to do the front end work, and then they need the clear expectations from it. So you talked a lot about actually already some effective strategies, just that front end work. But I'm curious to know if there are other strategies you're thinking of for empowering educators to take ownership of their professional growth in the midst of teaching a curriculum with fidelity.
A big one that I speak to so much in my world of multilingual learners is really encouraging. And it's funny because I feel like the longer I do this and spend time in this niche, the more I really want to talk to school leaders because we kind of keep coming back around to these systemic and structural things that really the only person that can have an influence on these things is the administrator. But having school-wide systems that are established for teacher collaboration. And something that I'm always advocating for is that we are constantly mindful of and have our radar on for any educators that may be outliers, that may be sidelined that need to be sitting at the table. I see this so much with specialists in particular, people that are not teaching assistants, but teachers who have immense expertise that will support rich tier 1 instruction and support teachers, but whose voices are not being heard to the extent they could be or should be. So I'm always cheering for those who are intentional about creating those spaces and the time for teacher teams to gather to, come around that curriculum and say, okay, let's put all of our heads together and consider ways that we can make this accessible to every learner in the class, because the writer of that curriculum did not know those students that are in the class. We know these students, right? So
Right.
I think that would be probably the most powerful thing that a school leader could do outside of clear communication of expectations, is then empower the teachers by giving them space to do what they do best.
Yeah. Yeah. As you're talking, I'm thinking about a couple of different things. And first, and I inevitably I'm going to forget one of the two things that I'm thinking about, but I'm going to go backwards, because one of the things that I feel like, as far as expectations go, that leaders can do is say, here is, we want to give teachers authority and autonomy, but they need to know those clear expectations. Like, what is it permissible, or what do I have the permission to do flexibly? What do I not have the permission to do flexibly, right? And it's important to clarify those things and not make assumptions about those things. But then the other thing I was thinking is, you're talking about teams of teachers getting together, and really these teachers who have strong tier 1 instruction and are trying to meet the needs of their students, we want them to have a voice. And those kinds of team meetings, if you will, if it's a PLC team meeting, whatever it is, they need to be facilitated so that everyone has a voice. We cannot make the assumption that these teachers are going to get together and just naturally collaborate effectively and take those things back to their classroom. So, and I think that's a hard balance for leaders too, like especially instructional coaches, because we might get into a situation where we notice that, man, this team's really not collaborating, or this teacher who I know has these high impact strategies happening, I would love for her to speak up, but she's just not doing it. So we have to know how to facilitate that effectively without also taking over the conversation.
Yeah, that's the meat of the work of the instructional coach, I feel like, is finding that that sweet spot of nurturing and coaching until you start to see people really blossom, right? That's the joy of being an instructional coach. That takes so much time and work on multiple fronts, I think. You have to be nurturing also a school-wide culture of respecting everyone and their expertise, and celebrating the goodness in every single educator, so that everyone knows their awesomeness and that's being seen and it's made visible. I think building that positivity into your school culture, baking that in, is way easier said than done these days. But goes such a long way. And I think instructional coaches are so valuable because they see things from a unique perspective. They can point out that goodness that others may be so head down and in it or overwhelmed, they may not even recognize it. And I think lending a structure, as you said, to PLC meetings, to team meetings, goes a long way to helping teachers have a physiological sense of calm, knowing what's expected when they show up to the meeting, and to know what's going to happen and what the ultimate objectives are. What are their goals? Establishing norms. There's these basic things that I remember learning about in the first school district I taught in Virginia, like 20 years ago, that now I still want to reiterate for people
Mhm.
these basics of establishing strong teams. We think they're simple and everyone just gets it, but not so.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely not so. You were talking about things being like baked into our culture, like that positivity and everything. And I think definitely implementing a new or implementing a curriculum with Fidelity has lots of potential for us to find the sweet spots, right? And celebrate the good and celebrate the successes. But I think so often what happens is because teachers get bogged down and overwhelmed, it's hard for them to take ownership of that professional growth and development. It's hard for them to continue to move forward. So I guess one of my other questions for you is how, because that really breaks down trust, right? And it really breaks down communication and it breaks down our teams. So if you were speaking to instructional coaches or leaders or teachers, what are some ways you feel like people could build trust so that there is that open communication about implementing curriculum with Fidelity and also meeting the needs of students?
Do you mean like building trust in each other or building almost like
Yes.
a sense of okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like as someone who's facilitating those meetings, just some things that come to mind first are listen well, be an active listener. These things, listening with our whole body, giving people time, um, and redirecting conversation gently if needed. Those
Mm.
so key that people know that they're being heard, and affirming people. Teachers can have very, as we know, different approaches, different opinions, different mindsets, and I feel like, in some cases, instructional coaches feel like they're kind of trying to turn the Titanic, like little bit by little bit. But even just for yourself as an instructional coach, celebrating that inch by inch growth that you see, because some of these things do take time and we have to
Mm.
be patient
Mhm.
and enjoy the process. I think so often we're so, outcome oriented. We just want to see the change now and make it happen now. And we want that person's personality to just be different now. And we want that person to be on board with our new curriculum adoption now, right? But these are people, right?
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
takes time and it takes relationship. I think the strongest instructional coaches I've ever had, our relationship was based on mutual respect, trust, sharing some personal things. Didn't have to be too deep, but just doing life together. It was the
Mhm.
people that said, "Hey, how's your husband liking his new job?" These little things that even if it was one or two things that they knew about my personal life, if they brought up that one or two little things like, "Oh, I was sold," that I was a fan, right?
Yeah.
Immediate buy-in, because they took the time to try to get to know me, and man, those people stand out as my mind as being the best leaders I've ever had. So
Yeah.
those would be a couple of things I would say.
I love it. Okay, I'm about to ask you it's kind of an off the wall question, but not really, but a little bit. So just bear with me. And I'm going to give you a little bit to think about it because after I ask this question, I'm going to direct everybody to the link that's below. But here it is. I want you to envision a team of teachers sitting around a table, and you know that you want them to combat fidelity freeze together, and you know that you're working toward nurturing teacher agency and collaboration. I would love to hear in your mind what that team collaboration looks like, what it sounds like, what it feels like, what you notice about people, and how you notice them utilizing curriculum with Fidelity still. So while you're thinking about that, Speaking of curriculum, audience, if you go to catchingupwithcasey.com/curriculum cakewalk, in April, it's toward the end of April, I'm going to be sharing some strategies and tools for how to successfully roll out curriculum or new programs that will help your teachers to feel more confident and less overwhelmed. So go to that when you get a chance, register for that live, catchingupwithcasey.com/curriculum cakewalk. Okay, Courtney, it's all you.
I love the name Curriculum Cakewalk. It's so like, ooh, I want to come.
Yeah, because we know it is not no curriculum cakewalk. There's nothing a cakewalk about it.
That's great. Well, to respond to your question, I think a little piece of it that came to mind was, what if we were to start on the front end instead of imposing goals and here's what we want to do and here's how we're going to do it? What if we were to have a collective conversation first before we really dive into the work on the front end, involving the teachers that are going to be doing the doings of this curriculum and saying, hey, here's the thing. We have this tool. We want it to be useful for everyone. We want it to be impactful for every student. Let's talk about some ways that we can gather around pieces of this curriculum regularly and talk about how it's going and how we are using it and how we can make it better. What might that look like? And having the teachers share. Like, I know it sounds like, revolutionary, but it's like this very simple act of letting teachers share and have input on the front end, rather than here's the structure we're going to use, et cetera, et cetera. And I think sitting around that table, I can see a facilitator guiding, but not doing all the talking. I can see general education and specialists having a voice at that table so that at the end of the day, we can actually say we are providing equitable tier 1 instruction. Can I get an amen on that one? Okay.
Yes.
That's like number 1 in my book.
Yeah, guys, let's just, if you're here with us live, please put in the comments #amen, because for real, like, we want to see that. That's beauty right there. Okay, keep going.
All my multilingual learner teacher, like, their friends are like, yes, thank you. We're always excited to contribute and support and make life easier for people. That's our goal. But yes, I'm excited for this training you're going to provide, because I think it's going to give people a sense of how can we proactively approach this rather than needing to be reactive on the back end. Once everything's falling apart and teachers are in tears and people are complaining over here, and this side of the school district is saying this while teachers this side of the school district are saying this, there's like some things that I'm seeing that if we were to take action on the front end and have some steps to all be on the same page from the beginning, I think it would alleviate a lot of this. And that time together, those teams, that's where the good stuff happens, as you know.
Yes, it is. That's fantastic. So there's, what you're saying reminds me of this graphic that I have shown teachers before as we've gone through this process, and I've used it in some of my trainings too, but it's this bell curve basically. And I forget who coined this graphic, so I'm not even going to try because I'll mess it up. But it is, imagine like these two large bells and a dip in the middle. And in the beginning, you feel, I want to say that you feel, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's basically like we're kind of feeling good. We're maybe confident about what we're about to experience. And then we hit this slump, right? And we get down into what this person calls insight. And what I always say is, when we get into insight, that's where we're experiencing the suck. Like, this is where you're gaining so much insight about how things could go or should have gone. And it is really a difficult time, but we have to go through that insight in order to build back up our confidence and our assuredness to implement, whatever it is, the initiative, the curriculum, the program, whatever it might be.
Mhm.
But I think it's important to talk about that too upfront with teams is we're going to go through that period, and that period of time where we're gaining insight is actually necessary.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And sometimes you don't know what those sticky points are until
Yeah.
you're in it a little bit. I mean, obviously, I'm just thinking of my local school district. That curriculum is hefty. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it takes a while for teachers to read through the lessons. It's taken a while for teachers to get accustomed to the format of the lessons, to get a feel for, what the flow of those lessons is like. And a lot of them that I've spoken with are fans, but it's taken a while for them to get to the point where they're like, okay, now I feel comfortable with it. But at the same time, that's also where questions are starting to arise
Yeah.
and where people are starting to say, okay, this is great, but
Mm-hmm.
what about such and such learner? Or what if I want to do this or that? I think what's
Mm-hmm.
been really hard is that because the lessons are so packed, and the teachers feel this pressure to, quote, get through the lessons. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that phrase. They don't have any time, minimal to zero time to incorporate any supplementary activities,
Mm-hmm.
remedial kind of activities, things that will just be engaging for their students or meet with their students' interests and cultures so that we can be culturally responsive and sustaining, right? Lots of best practices are possible and can be infused with these lessons, but teachers, I think, are they're not seeing any space or any room to do that. And I think that's where those teacher teams can really be beneficial, because that's where you can have conversations around, okay, we see this challenge. What are the core elements of these lessons that we want to say these are non-negotiables?
Mm-hmm.
This is where we truly value the pacing of this. We truly value this and this and this element. But where is there wiggle room? Where could we maybe take a text that's provided within the curriculum and look at the racial and cultural composition of our class and say, there might be another kind of text that's going to reach them and be more relevant to them, but still get across the same content, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's, hey, there's this written component, this writing practice response to the content element, but it is not appropriate for my level 1 multilingual learner who's still working at a word level in his or her writing. Maybe instead of feeling like we have to give that same writing activity to everyone, we can let ourselves breathe a little bit and collaborate and bring in a specialist to kind of provide some ideas for scaffolding and still get the same content across, but in a way that's actually been way more effective in reaching all the learners, right? So that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
where I see those teacher teams like making magic happen, really,
Yeah.
truly.
Yeah. Yeah. And pulling in because and you've talked about this a couple of times tonight, and it just really gives me chills thinking about it. But imagining all of these different people who are not general ed classroom teachers coming in, your instructional specialists, your RTI specialist, your assessment coordinator, anyone who has expertise that you could benefit from collaborating with. I just love that so much. Perfect. Okay, so we've come to the end of this episode, and I've just had so much fun. And I'm telling you, this is one of those conversations that I feel like, oh my gosh, we could keep talking and just carry on the conversation for hours, and it would just unfold into all kinds of different topics. But we're going to close for tonight. And Courtney, I would love to hear what you hope our listeners would take away from this conversation. And listeners, I would love for you to comment also and let us know what has been most useful for you here tonight.
So I'll leave you with an analogy because I love analogies. If you think about teaching as riding a bike, when we're first starting off, we have our training wheels on and we need them, right? But there's not a whole lot of maneuvering and making anything fancy happen. We're riding the bike, but we're riding the bike like it's working. We're making forward movement happen. But at some point, as our expertise grows, we can take those training wheels off and we can go over bumps and around turns and, do little jumps or go up a little hill, right? Teachers right now who are ready, who have the capacity to do incredible things, I think are feeling like they've had their training wheels put back on. And so just along this topic of teacher agency, I would just encourage instructional leaders to let your teachers take those training wheels off and trust them to do what they know how to do best, and give them space to share that goodness with those that can benefit.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I love it so much. I don't even have anything to add to that because it was just mwah, chef's kiss. Love it. Okay. Thank you so much for coming on tonight, Courtney. This has been a blast.
It's been so much fun to talk to you, Casey. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, guys, we're going to close here, and I hope that you will come to next week's episode, and be sure that you also get on my website, catchingupwithcasey.com/curriculum cakewalk, so I can talk to you about making the implementation of new curriculum or programs more of a cakewalk and less of chaos. Okay, guys, thanks for coming, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Hey there, thanks for joining this episode. I would love for you to do me 3 solid favors before you head out. Number 1, subscribe to this show. I've got a lot of great guests and content coming up, and I don't want you to miss any of it. Number 2, share this show. Share it with your like-minded colleagues and friends and those leaders who are eager to build cohesive, vision-driven teams. And finally, connect with me on all the social media platforms. You can find me at Catch Up with Casey on Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Until next time, go off and create teams that leave people feeling inspired, empowered, and eager for more each day.